I have killed things that the rest of the galaxy was too afraid to even name. That is not a boast. It is just the truth of what I was before that day. My people do not lie about such things, and I will not start now, when the story I am about to tell you is the only one I have ever been frightened to get wrong. My name is Vorek. I served 11 cycles as a perimeter officer on a way station called Hollow Reach, out on the cold edge of the trade lanes, where the stars thin out and the dark gets so deep you stop trusting your own eyes. I had seen war. I had seen the things that live in the spaces between worlds. I thought I knew what courage looked like. I was wrong. I want to tell you about a human girl, and about the most feared animal in our part of the galaxy, and about a single thorn the length of my forearm. And I want to tell you about the moment everything I believed about strength got turned inside out, in front of 300 witnesses, by a creature so small she barely came up to my chest. Stay with me. This part is hard to begin, because the beginning is where I was still the kind of person who would have let it die. Let me set the scene for you, because if you have never been to a place like Hollow Reach, you cannot understand what kind of day it was. The station was old, older than the treaty that strung our peoples together, older than the names we used for half the things on board. It hung in the black above a dead gray moon, a great ugly ring of metal and welded plating, spinning slow so the floors would hold you down. From the outside it looked like something half-finished and then abandoned, and honestly that was not far from the truth. It had been built by a species that no longer existed, and we just kept patching the holes they left behind. Inside, though, inside it was alive. You have to picture it. The main concourse was a long curved hall, 3 levels high, lit by those old amber strips that hummed when the power dipped. The air was always a little too warm and always smelled of about 40 things at once. Coolant, fried protein from the food stalls, the dry chalk smell of the Tellerin merchants, the sweetness the Aeon put in their breathing masks. The floor plates were worn smooth in the center from 1,000 cycles of feet, and claws and rolling cargo. And the noise. Hollow Reach never went quiet. There were the loaders, the big 6-legged hauler machines that walked the cargo lanes on hydraulic joints, hissing and clanking, their warning lights painting the walls orange. There were the translator drones drifting overhead, little spheres of dull metal blinking as they caught and turned a dozen languages into a dozen others. There were the docking klaxons, the merchant calls, the rattle of credit chits, the constant low growl of the recyclers somewhere deep in the hull. It was a place of machines that had outlived their makers, kept running by hands and claws that did not always understand them. 40 species passed through Hollow Reach in a normal cycle. The tall, slow Tellerin with their stone-colored skin. The Aeon, small and quick and nervous, always in clusters. The Dreven pilots who never took off their flight rigs. My own people, the Vorthan, broad, armored across the shoulders, built for cold worlds, built, if I am honest, for violence. We made good security. Everyone knew it. When you saw a Vorthan in a perimeter uniform, you stepped aside, and that suited us fine. And then, in the last few cycles before the day I am telling you about, there were the humans. They were new to the lanes, newer than new. Their little ships came limping in from a direction nobody had bothered to map properly, full of these soft pink and brown creatures with their flat faces and their strange forward-set eyes and their endless, exhausting talking. They were small. They were weak by any honest measure, no claws worth the name, no armor, no fangs, bones that snapped if you looked at them too hard. The medics on station made a study of them early on, and the report went around like a joke. They cannot regrow a limb. They sleep for a third of their lives. They will die in 4 rotations without water. They feel pain the way the rest of us feel a stubbed claw, except all the time, everywhere, and they keep going anyway. That last part should have been a warning. We laughed at it instead. We called them the soft ones. We were not kind about it. When a human walked the concourse, the merchants overcharged them, the loaders did not slow for them, and more than one of my fellow officers found small cruelties to amuse themselves with on a long shift. I would like to tell you I stopped it. I did not. I told myself it was not my concern. I told myself they would learn the lanes or leave them, and either way it was no business of a perimeter officer whose job was the hull, not the hearts of the creatures inside it. That was the kind of person I was. So now you know the place. An old ring of borrowed metal, full of borrowed machines, spinning in the dark, packed with creatures who mostly tolerated each other and a few new arrivals nobody respected. Now let me tell you about the girl. I did not know her name at first. None of us bothered. To me, she was just one more of the soft ones, a small human who worked the lower medical bay, the cheap one, the one for cargo crews and dock laborers who could not afford the proper clinics on the upper levels. I learned her name later. It was Ren Halloran. She could not have been more than what humans count as a young adult, barely past the age they let their young run loose. She wore a medic's gray coat that was too big for her, the sleeves rolled up over thin forearms, and she kept her dark hair tied back out of her face in a way that was always coming loose. There was a smear of something on the cuff of that coat more often than not. She moved fast and talked faster and laughed too much for a place like Hollow Reach, where laughing drew attention you did not want. What I remember most, looking back, is that she touched things. Patients, I mean. Other species. Most of us kept our distance from each other, different skins, different illnesses, different ideas of what a respectful distance was. But this human would put her small bare hand right on a Tellerin stone arm to feel for the heat of an infection, or steady an Aeon's shaking shoulder while she worked, or grip a frightened dockhand's claw and not let go until the worst was over. She did it without thinking, as if the gap between her species and yours was a thing she simply did not see. The first time I really noticed her, it was because of a Dreven pilot who had crushed his hand in a docking clamp. Bad wound. The kind that smells before you see it. The upper clinics turned him away. Dreven physiology is rare and difficult and they did not want the liability. So he ended up in the lower bay, gray-faced, going into shock, and I was there because a crushed pilot is a perimeter incident and someone had to log it. I watched this small human work on a creature twice her size for the better part of a rotation. She did not stop. She did not flinch at the smell or the sounds he made. At one point the Dreven, half out of his mind with pain, lashed out and caught her across the face with the back of his good hand. Knocked her right off her feet. I stepped forward to drag him down. That is what we do, we Vorthen. We end the threat, and she held up one bloody hand to stop me. "He's scared," she said. "That's all, he's just scared." Her lip was split. She was bleeding down her chin. And she turned back to the pilot and put her hand on his crushed arm again, gentle as anything, and kept working. I remember standing there with my fists half raised, feeling something I did not have a word for. It was not respect. I would not have admitted to respect, not then. But it was the first crack in the thing I believed about the soft ones. Just a hairline crack. Easy to ignore. I ignored it. I want you to remember that pilot and that bloody hand held up to stop me. Because what happened later was just that same small human, doing the same thing she always did, on a scale none of us were ready for. The day it happened started wrong, the way bad days do, with a dozen small things that meant nothing on their own. The long-range scanners had been glitching for 2 rotations. Old machine like everything else on Hollow Reach. The technicians said it was nothing, a calibration drift, and they would get to it. Because of that, we did not see the thing coming until it was almost on us. There had been a freighter 3 cycles before that limped in from the deep lanes with its hull scored and half its crew gone. Pirate work, everyone assumed, or an asteroid field, or simple bad luck. The captain raved about something that had latched onto his ship out in the dark, something he could not describe. And we logged it as deep space delirium and moved on. We should have listened. The thing he could not describe had followed the freighter's heat trail all the way to our door, and now it was here, and it was dying. It came in on the dorsal cargo bay, the big open one we used for ore haulers. The first we knew of it was the proximity alarm. That long, awful wail that means something is on the hull that should not be on the hull. Then the cargo bay pressure doors blew their seals from the outside, which should have been impossible, and the emergency bulkhead slammed down, and the whole station shuddered like a struck bell. I was on the concourse when it happened. 300 souls, give or take, all of us frozen for one heartbeat as the alarm wailed and the deck shook. And then the secondary doors to the cargo bay buckled inward, the reinforced ones, the ones rated to hold against vacuum and impact. And through the gap came a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. It was not a roar. A roar would have been almost comforting. We all understand a roar. This was a sound like grief, like the deep, broken keening of something in so much pain it could no longer tell the difference between attacking and crying out. And then it was through the door, and 300 of us saw a Carith for the first time in the flesh, in the light. You may not know what a Carith is. Out where you are, they may be a story, a thing parents use to frighten the young. Let me tell you what they are to us, because it matters for what comes next. The Carith are the apex predator of the deep lanes, the thing the dark itself is afraid of. They do not need ships. They live in the vacuum, drifting between the cold places, and they hunt by heat and by something we never fully understood, some sense that let them find a warm vessel across distances that should have made it impossible. They are big. This one, hunched and wounded, still filled the broken doorway and had to drag itself sideways to fit through. 6 limbs. A body like banded muscle under plates of dark chitin that drank the amber light and gave nothing back. A head that was mostly jaw, ringed with feeding parts, and high above it, set far back. A cluster of pale eyes that did not blink. Every species on that station had a story about the Carith, and every story ended the same way, with everyone dead. They were not thought to be intelligent. They were thought to be hunger given a shape. Galactic doctrine, the official position of every council that had ever convened on the matter, was simple and absolute. A Carith is not a creature to be reasoned with. A Carith is a force to be destroyed, and quickly, before it can multiply the dead. I had read that doctrine. I believed it. And when that thing came through the door, dragging itself, keening, with the merchants screaming and the loaders crashing into walls in their blind, automated panic, I did exactly what 11 cycles of training had built me to do. I raised my weapon, and I called it in. Perimeter, perimeter, we have a Carith breach on the main concourse. Full lethal response. All officers converge. Get the civilians clear and put this thing down. My voice did not shake. I was proud of that for about 90 seconds, until I understood what I was actually looking at. Here is the thing the doctrine never mentioned, because the doctrine was written by people who only ever saw Carith at the moment of killing or being killed. It was hurt. Not battle hurt, not the clean damage of a fight. This was something else, something that had been eating at it for a long time. As it hauled itself onto the concourse, dragging that great banded body across the worn floor plates, I could see the way one whole side of it had gone wrong. The dark chitin there was cracked and weeping a pale fluid that hissed where it touched the deck. The limbs on that side barely worked. And the keening, that grief sound, rose and fell with a rhythm I slowly, sickly realized I recognized. It was breathing. The sound was the sound of something trying to breathe around an agony so large it had swallowed everything else. Carith did not attack. That was the part that made my crest go cold. 300 soft targets scattered in front of it, screaming, slow, easy, and it did not attack. It dragged itself to the center of the concourse, into the worn, smooth circle where 10,000 cycles of feet had polished the metal, and it collapsed. It went down on its wounded side with a crash that I felt in my teeth, and it lay there and it keened, and its pale eyes rolled, and it did nothing at all to the prey all around it. A creature of pure hunger does not lie down in the middle of a feast and weep. I lowered my weapon a finger's width, just a finger's width, and then my fellow officers arrived, 6 of them, big Vorthan in perimeter armor, and they did not lower anything. They formed a half-ring around the fallen thing with their weapons up, and their commander, a hard old officer named Drask, who I had served under for 8 cycles and never once seen hesitate, took one look and gave the order I had already given. Kill it now, before it gets its wind back. And we would have. I want you to understand that. We would have burned that thing down where it lay, doctrine satisfied, station saved, story over. 6 Vorthen with military-grade weapons against one crippled animal. It would have taken less than a minute. The merchants would have cheered. We would have dragged the carcass out the airlock and gone back to overcharging humans by nightfall. That is when the small gray figure came running out of the crowd and put herself between us and the monster. I did not even recognize her at first. Just a human, a small one in a too big gray coat, sprinting toward the thing every instinct in the galaxy said to run from. The crowd had been flowing away from the Careth like water from a dropped stone, and here was this one creature cutting against the whole tide, and for a moment I genuinely thought she had lost her mind. Pain shock, maybe. Sometimes the soft ones broke under fear in strange ways. Then she planted herself between the muzzle of Drask's weapon and the fallen Careth, threw her thin arms out wide, and screamed at us. "Stop, stop. Don't shoot it, look at it, just look, it's not attacking anyone." I will never forget Drask's face. Pure, blank incomprehension. In his entire long life nothing had ever stood between a Vorthen officer and a Careth except more dead bodies. The idea that someone might defend the thing did not have a place in his mind to live. "Move, human," he said. His voice had gone very flat and very quiet, which was how Drask sounded right before something died. "Move or burn with it." She did not move. I want to describe her to you exactly as she was in that moment, because the picture has never left me. She could not have weighed a third of what Drask weighed. Her hands, flung out to either side, were shaking. Not bravely steady shaking. You could see it across the whole concourse, this small creature trembling like a struck wire. Her face had gone the pale, bloodless gray that means terror in a human. She was so frightened she could barely breathe. And she did not move. "It's in pain," she said, and her voice cracked right down the middle, and she said it anyway. "Can't you hear it? That's not a hunting sound. I've heard 100 things in pain in that med bay. That is pain. There's something wrong with it, and it came here, it came to people, and we're going to murder it because we're too scared to look." Behind her, the Careth keened. Its pale eyes had found the small gray shape standing in front of it, and the great jaw, ringed with feeding parts that could have closed over her whole body, did not so much as twitch toward her. Drask's weapon did not lower. "It is a Careth," he said, as if that ended every argument that had ever existed, as if the word itself were a sentence and a verdict. "Doctrine is absolute. Last warning, human." I watched her swallow. I watched her decide something. And then this small, soft creature, who could not regrow a limb, who would die in 4 rotations without water, who felt pain the way we feel it except all the time and everywhere. This creature turned her back on 6 armed Vorthen and faced the most feared predator in the galaxy, and took a step toward it. The whole concourse made a single sound, 300 throats at once, the sound a crowd makes when it watches someone die. She talked to it. That is the part I still cannot fully explain, even now, even after everything. She walked toward a wounded Careth with her empty hands held out in front of her, palms up, and she talked to it low and steady, the way you would talk to a frightened patient. "Hey, hey, it's all right. I'm not going to hurt you. I know it hurts. I know, I'm just going to look. Just going to look, that's all." The translator drones could not handle it. Whatever language the Careth thought in, if it thought at all, was not in any database. The little spheres drifted overhead spitting confused static, turning her words into nothing the creature could understand. But she kept talking anyway, and I understood slowly, watching her, that the words were not for the Careth. The words were for her, to keep her own feet moving, to keep her own voice from shattering. Each soft, steady sentence was a rope she was throwing across the gap of her own terror, hand over hand, pulling herself toward the thing that could kill her. "Ren," someone in the crowd was sobbing, a human voice. "Ren, please, please come back, please." so that was how I learned her name, from someone begging her not to die. She did not come back. She reached the Kareth. And then she knelt down, this tiny creature, right beside the wounded flank of a thing that the dark itself feared, close enough that the pale fluid weeping from its cracked chitin was hissing on the deck a hand's width from her knee, and she looked at the wound. I had my weapon up. We all did. If that jaw had moved, if those 6 limbs had so much as flexed, we would have burned them both, and I would have hated myself for the rest of my life, but I would have done it. Every officer on that ring was waiting for the same thing, for the doctrine to be right, for the monster to be a monster. The Kareth turned its great head. Slowly. Those pale, unblinking eyes came around to the small gray figure kneeling at its side, and from somewhere deep in that banded body came a new sound, lower than the keening, rougher, a sound I had never heard a Kareth make, because no living thing had ever been close enough to a Kareth to hear it. It was a sound like a question. Ren went very still. I saw her shoulders rise and fall as she breathed, and then she answered it in that same low, steady voice, as if the most feared predator in the galaxy had simply asked her where it hurt. "I know," she said. "I see it. Let me look, just let me look." And she leaned in toward the wound. What she found there changed everything, though none of us understood that yet. I had assumed the wound was battle damage, or sickness, or the simple rot of a dying animal. I was looking for a reason to fire and feel justified. But Ren got close, closer than any sane creature would, and she went silent in a way that was different from her frightened silence. This was the silence of someone seeing something. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, you poor thing, what did this to you?" Then she did something that made my crest stand straight up in alarm. She called back over her shoulder, not to the crowd, not to us, but to her own kind in that human way of refusing to face danger alone. "I need my kit. Somebody get me my kit, the big one, lower bay, now." For a moment nobody moved. Then a second human broke from the crowd, the one who had been sobbing her name, a young male, and he ran toward the medical bay, away from the safety of the exits and the sheer ordinary courage of it. This terrified soft creature running errands in front of a Kareth because his friend had asked him to, did something to the crowd. The screaming changed pitch. It became watching. 300 creatures who had been ready to flee were now, against every instinct, leaning in. Drask's voice came low and furious across the ring. "Vorek, what is she doing? What is that thing tolerating? Kareth do not tolerate. Kareth do not." "I don't know," I said, and it was the truest thing I had said in 11 cycles. "I don't know, Drask, but it's not attacking. It hasn't attacked anyone. It came in here and it lay down and it's letting her touch it." "That is not possible. I am watching it happen." And we were, all of us. We were watching the impossible happen on the worn, smooth center of the concourse floor, and not one of us had a doctrine for it. The male human came pounding back with a heavy gray case, skidded to a stop at the edge of the unthinkable and could not make himself come closer. He slid the case across the deck plates to Ren, who caught it without looking, the way you catch something from someone you have worked beside 1,000 times. She flipped it open. Tools glinted. And she got to work on the most feared animal in the galaxy as casually and as desperately as she had worked on that crushed Dreven pilot, while 6 Vorthan weapons stayed trained on the back of her unprotected head. That is where I am going to leave the worst of it for now, because what she pulled out of that wound, and what happened in the breath right after she pulled it free, is the heart of this whole story, and it deserves to be told properly, not rushed. But I will tell you this much, to carry you forward. When she finally found the thing that had been eating that creature alive, when she got her small human hands around it and braced her feet against the deck and looked back at her trembling friend and said, "Hold the light steady. This is going to hurt it, and it might. It might react, so be ready to run. Both of you be ready to run." I lowered my weapon. All the way. For the first time in my career, in the presence of a Kareth, I lowered my weapon all the way to the floor. because I had finally understood what I was looking at. It was not a monster being handled by a fool. It was a wounded thing that had crossed the freezing dark, dying in agony, and had somehow chosen, out of every door in the galaxy, to drag itself to the one species soft enough and reckless enough and kind enough to kneel down beside it and ask where it hurt. The Careth had not come to Hollow Reach to feed. It had come to be helped, and the only one in 300 who saw that, who believed it, was a shaking human girl in a coat 3 sizes too big. I told you at the start that a human taught my people what mercy looked like. This is the moment, right here. The small gray shape bent over the great dark wound with a thin tool in her steady now hands. This is where the lesson began. What came next, when the thorn came free, that is where it finished teaching me. I have thought about that next moment more times than I can count. I have turned it over in the dark of long shifts, and I have described it to younglings who did not believe me, and I have woken from sleep with the sound of it still in my ears. So let me tell it slowly, let me get it right. The small gray human knelt at the side of the most feared animal in the galaxy, with a thin metal tool in her hand and her friend holding a light over her shoulder, and she looked at what she had found. And for a moment, she just breathed. I could see her chest rising and falling. I could see her gathering herself. Then she looked back at the 2 terrified humans crouched behind her, and she said the words I told you about. Hold the light steady. This is going to hurt it and it might react, so be ready to run. Both of you. If it moves, you go, don't wait for me. The male human, his name I learned later was Davy, said something I will never forget. He said, "We're not leaving you, Ren." His voice was shaking so hard the words came out in pieces, but he did not leave. And the other one, a young female who had carried the second light, she just shook her head and held her ground. 3 soft creatures, kneeling beside a Careth, refusing to run from each other. I had spent 11 cycles believing that strength was the thing my people had, and the soft ones did not. Standing on that ring with my lowered weapon, I watched 3 humans decide that they would rather die together than abandon one another to a monster, and I felt the foundation of that belief crack straight down the middle. Ren turned back to the wound, and now, finally, I could see what she had seen. There was something in the Careth, buried deep in the cracked, weeping flesh of its wounded flank anchored under the chitin, was a thing the length of my forearm. At first I took it for bone, its own bone, perhaps, shattered and driven inward. But it was the wrong color, a sick translucent amber, and it was barbed. Wickedly barbed all along its length, the barbs angled backward so that anything that drove it in would lock it in place, and anything that tried to pull it out would tear. I did not know what it was then. We learned later. It was the spine of a thing called a drift lurker, a parasite hunter of the deep lanes, a creature that ambushes the great drifting Careth and lodges its barbed spines in their flesh and then feeds slowly, over many cycles, riding the host through the dark until the host dies and the lurker moves on. The spine secretes a poison that keeps the wound from closing and keeps the host weak and keeps it in constant, grinding pain. This Careth had been carrying that thing inside it for a long, long time. It had crossed an unimaginable gulf of freezing dark, dying by degrees, with a barbed poison spine buried in its side, and somewhere out there in the cold, it had caught the heat of a freighter and followed it home, not to feed, but because some last desperate instinct had told it that where there is heat, there is life, and where there is life, there might be help. And the only help in 300 souls was a human girl who had decided that a sound of pain was a sound of pain, no matter how monstrous the throat it came from. "Okay," I heard her whisper. To herself, to the Careth, to all of us, I could not tell. "Okay, the barbs go backward. If I just pull, I'll shred it open and it'll bleed out. I have to turn it. I have to turn it as I pull so the barbs fold flat. It's going to hurt. I'm so sorry. It's going to hurt so much." She set her tool against the base of the spine. She braced her small feet against the worn deck plates. She looked up one last time into the cluster of pale, unblinking eyes that were watching her, and she said, Trust me, please, just for 1 second, trust me." And then she pulled. The Kareth screamed. Not the keening grief sound from before. This was the full voice of a Kareth, the sound that the doctrine was written about, the sound that was the last thing 100 crews had ever heard. A roar that hit the curved walls of the concourse and came back doubled, that rattled the amber light strips in their housings, that drove every creature in that crowd to their knees with their hands or claws or breathing membranes clamped over whatever they heard with. 6 Vorthan weapons snapped up. I snapped mine up with them. Every cycle of training screamed now, the monster is the monster, fire. And the great head reared up over the small gray figure, jaw gaping, feeding parts spread wide, close enough that it could have ended her between one breath and the next. And it did not. It screamed at the ceiling. It thrashed its head. Its 6 limbs scrabbled and dug furrows in the metal floor. But the head did not come down on her. The jaw did not close on the soft thing causing it so much agony. Even drowning in pain, the Kareth held itself back from the creature that was the source of that pain because, and I understood this in a flash that rearranged everything I was because it knew. On some level deeper than language, deeper than doctrine, it understood that the small gray shape hurting it was the only thing in the galaxy trying to make the hurting stop. And Ren never let go. That is the part. The Kareth was screaming and thrashing and its head was a hand's width from her and she did not flinch back. She did not drop the tool. She planted herself and turned that barbed spine and pulled, and her voice rose over the roar, cracking, screaming back at it. "I've got it. I've got it. Almost, hold on." The spine came free. It came out in a long, sick, wet rush, the barbs folding flat the way she had said, that forearm length of poison amber sliding out of the wound, and she fell backward onto the deck with it clutched in both hands, and a great gout of dark fluid followed it, and the Kareth's scream broke off into a sound none of us had words for, a vast shuddering exhalation, the sound of an agony that had lasted 100 cycles finally ending. The great head came down. The whole crowd screamed. I started to fire. My claw was tightening on the trigger, I admit it. I was going to kill it to save her. And the Kareth laid its head down on the deck plates beside the small fallen human, gently, so gently, and went still. The silence after was the loudest thing I have ever heard. 300 creatures frozen, 6 Vorthan officers with weapons half raised and nowhere to point them, the amber lights humming, the recyclers growling somewhere deep in the hull. And in the worn, smooth center of the concourse, a Kareth with its great head resting on the floor, breathing, slow and deep and even, for what I would later realize was the first time in a very long time without pain, and beside it a small gray human sprawled on her back, still clutching a dripping barbed spine in both hands, staring up at the cluster of pale eyes a hand's width from her face. Nobody moved, nobody dared. And then Ren Halloran started to laugh. It was not a sound of madness. I had wondered in that moment if she had finally broken. But no. It was the laugh of someone who has been holding her whole body rigid against terror and pain and the certainty of death, and has just discovered, against all sense, that she is still alive. It bubbled up out of her, helpless and shaking, half a sob, and she let the spine clatter to the deck and pressed both her bloody hands over her face and just laughed, lying there beside the most feared animal in the galaxy. And the Kareth, I swear this on my crest, on my 11 cycles of service, on everything I am, the Kareth made a sound back. That low, rough question sound from before, and it pressed its great head very softly against her side. She lowered her hands. She looked at it. And this human, this soft, reckless, impossible creature, reached up and laid her small palm flat against the dark chitin of its jaw, the way she touched all her frightened patients, the way she had touched the crushed Dreven pilot, the way she touched the gap between species as if it were not there at all. "There," she said, her voice was wrecked, tears were running down into her hair. "There, all better now, you're all right, you're all right." I lowered my weapon to the floor for the second time that day, and this time I let it go entirely. I heard it clatter on the deck. I heard Drask, beside me, make a sound I had never heard him make, a low, broken breath, the sound of a hard old soldier watching his entire understanding of the universe quietly fall apart. "Stand down," he said. His voice was hoarse. "All officers, stand down, stand down." And we did. I want to tell you what the medics found, because it matters. They were afraid to come near, of course. It took the better part of a rotation before the station's senior physician, a Tellurin so old her stone skin had gone gray at the edges, would approach. By then the Careth had not moved except to breathe, and Wren had not left its side. She sat with her back against its banded flank, exhausted, filthy, and would not be moved either. And when the Tellurin physician finally crept close with her scanners, it was Wren who waved her in. Wren who said, "It's all right, she's a friend, she's here to help like me." The scanners told us things we had never known, because no one had ever been close enough to a living Careth to scan one. They told us the wound was already beginning to close, now that the poison spine was gone. They told us the creature was old, older than the station, perhaps. These things lived spans we could barely measure. And they told us something that went around the galaxy afterward and changed the doctrine forever. The Careth had a brain, a large one, structured, complex, layered in ways that mapped, the physicians argued about this for cycles afterward, onto the same regions that, in the speaking species, governed grief and memory and the recognition of other minds. The doctrine had called them hunger given a shape. The doctrine had been written by people who only ever met them at the moment of killing. But a thing that can grieve is a thing that can think, and a thing that can think is a thing that can choose. And this one had chosen, out of every door in the cold dark, to come to the door where the soft ones lived. It had bet its life on the chance that somewhere among us was a mind kind enough to see past the shape of it to the pain inside it. It had been right. By the narrowest margin in the galaxy, by one human girl in a coat 3 sizes too big, it had been right. The Careth stayed on Hollow Reach for 9 rotations. I know how that sounds. A Careth living on a populated station among 40 species who had spent their whole lives terrified of it. The Council sent furious messages. The doctrine demanded its destruction. Other stations refused to dock with us. And through all of it, Drask, hard old Drask, who had given the kill order without hesitation, stood at the Council uplink and said, in that flat, quiet voice, "I have served 11 cycles enforcing the doctrine on the Careth. I am telling you the doctrine is wrong. I watched it choose not to kill. I will not be the one to teach it that it was a fool to trust us." I had never been prouder to serve under anyone. The wound healed. Wren tended it twice a day, and the rest of the time she just sat with it, talked to it. The translator drones never did crack its language, but it did not seem to matter. She would sit against its great flank in the lower bay where they had cleared a space for it. And she would tell it about her day, about her patients, about the freighter crews and the dock hands and the small, endless dramas of a working medic. And the Careth would make its low, rough sounds back, and the pale eyes would follow her when she moved. And once, I saw this myself, when a dock hand stumbled and dropped a crate near her and she jumped. That great head came up instantly. Instantly, every feeding part flared, ready to kill anything that had startled her. It had decided she was its, or perhaps that it was hers. With a Careth, I am not sure there is a difference. On the 9th rotation, the wound was whole, and the creature was strong again, and we all knew what that meant. A thing that lives in the dark cannot stay in a metal ring forever. Wren knew it before any of us. She had known it, I think, from the first rotation. The kindest people always know the cost of the kind thing before they do it. She walked it to the dorsal cargo bay herself. Just the two of them, the small gray human and the great dark predator, moving down the concourse, and 300 souls lined the walls in silence to watch them pass. The merchants who had overcharged her, the loaders that had not slowed for her, my fellow officers, All of us, lining the walls, watching the soft one walk the monster home. At the bay door where the cold dark waited, she stopped. She put her hand on its jaw one last time. I was close enough to hear what she said. She said, "Go on, go home, you're better now, you don't need me anymore." And the careth made a sound, that question sound, low and rough, and pressed its head against her one final time, hard enough to rock her on her feet. And then it turned, and it went out through the bay into the black, and it was gone, and Wren Halloran stood in the open bay door with her hand still raised and watched the dark until long after there was anything left to see. She cried, of course she cried. She was a human, they leak when their hearts are full, it is one of the soft things about them. I had thought it weakness once. I stood beside her, a Vorthan perimeter officer who had given the order to kill it, and I did not know what to say, so I said the only true thing I had. I said, "You were braver than any soldier I have ever served with." And she wiped her face with the cuff of that ridiculous oversized coat, and she gave me a wet, exhausted, lopsided human smile, and she said, "It wasn't brave. It was just hurting, and somebody had to look." That should be the end of the story. For a long time I thought it was. But I told you I served 11 cycles on Hollow Reach, and the careth left in my 8th. So there are 3 more cycles, and there is one more thing, and it is the reason I still cannot tell this story all the way through without my voice doing something I am not proud of. It came back. Not right away. Cycles passed. The doctrine slowly changed, first on our station, then on others, as the scans and the reports spread, as more crews came forward with stories they had been too afraid to tell, of careth that had circled their ships and not attacked, of the dark choosing, again and again, not to kill. The galaxy began, slowly, clumsily, the way the galaxy does everything, to learn that it had been wrong about the monsters in the dark. And then 2 cycles after it left, the long-range scanners, repaired by then, picked up a careth inbound. The whole station tensed. Old instincts die hard. We went to the bay, weapons holstered now but present, and we waited. It came in gentle as anything. It settled into the cargo bay it had heeled in, and it made its low, rough question sound into the echoing space, and 300 souls understood at once, without a word, exactly who had returned and exactly who it was asking for. Someone ran for the lower bay. And a few moments later, Wren Halloran came sprinting down the concourse in a gray coat. A new one. The old one long since worn out, but still 3 sizes too big. She never did learn to buy them in her size, and she ran straight into that cargo bay and flung her small arms as far around that great dark head as they would go. And the careth made a sound I had never heard it make. A deep rolling thing that I felt in the deck plates, and I realized I was hearing a careth be happy. It had crossed the dark again, not dying this time, not desperate. It had simply come back, across an unimaginable gulf of cold and black, to see the one creature who had knelt down beside it when it was a monster and asked where it hurt. It did that every cycle after, for as long as I served there. Once a cycle, the scanners would catch it inbound, and the whole station would relax into something almost like joy, and Wren would run down to the bay, and the dark would have come home to visit her. The most feared predator in the galaxy, crossing the void on a schedule to spend a few rotations beside a human girl who had never been afraid of the right things and had never, not once, been afraid of the wrong ones. I am old now. I have left Hollow Reach. The doctrine on the careth is rewritten in every database that matters. They are listed now not as a force to be destroyed, but as a thinking people, wary and wounded and slow to trust, which, given what we used to do to them on sight, they have every reason to be. There are even a very few, who have learned to share space with the speaking species. It started with one. It always starts with one. People ask me sometimes why I tell this story. I am a Vorthan. We are not a sentimental people. We are built broad across the shoulders for cold worlds and for violence, and we made good security and everyone knew it, and that suited us fine. I tell it because I was there with my weapon raised and my doctrine certain, and I would have burned that creature down where it lay and called it courage. And I tell it because a small soft thing in a coat 3 sizes too big walked out in front of my weapon and showed me that everything I had called strength was just fear wearing armor, and everything I had called weakness, the touching, the leaking eyes, the refusing to run from each other, the kneeling down beside a monster to ask where it hurt, was the only real strength there had ever been. The galaxy was afraid of the dark for a very long time. We built our doctrines out of that fear. We were so proud of how well we could kill the thing we did not understand. And then the soft ones came limping in from an unmapped direction. And the very first thing they taught us, before the trade and the treaties and all the rest of it, the very first lesson, paid for by a girl who shook the whole time and did it anyway, was this. Sometimes the monster is just something in pain that the rest of the universe was too frightened to look at. And it only takes one person brave enough to look.